This video is brought to you by Sailrite. Visit sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions. In this tutorial video, we'll be showing you how to sew up your very own extension panel from the Dodger to the Bimini. An extension panel like this can help provide needed protection from the sun for the crew. This panel will zip to the Dodger and the Bimini. The extension panel will be made from sunbrella fabric available at Sailrite. The zipper that you'll be sewing onto the Dodger includes a cover that will protect it from the sun. Once it's zipped to the Dodger, the extension panel is led back to the Bimini. There, it is zipped onto the tail of the Bimini. If you already have a Dodger and a Bimini, this video will show you how to build the extension panel between the two, including installing the zippers on the Dodger and the Bimini, and obviously on the extension panel. If you do not have a Dodger or a Bimini, check out the Sailrite Dodger and Bimini kits, available from Sailrite. Let's get started and show you how to build your very own extension panel from Dodger to Bimini. First, we need to get some pattern material and place it on top of the aft portion of the Dodger.
We have cut some Durascrim pattern material for the extension. We've cut it long enough to go down to the handrail on both the port and starboard side, and wide enough to cover the front edge and come back of the stitch line by about a foot.
The pattern material's been cut to about 3 foot in width, and it does cover the aft edge of the Dodger by about 2 foot going forward of the aft edge.
And then we'll use pony clamps, and we will clamp it in place. The first thing I like to do is I like to clamp it to the handrail with it rather snug. So I'm going to use the pony clamp and clamp it here.
If your Dodger did not have a handrail, just clamp it to the aft edge.
So it's a little bit on the snug side. Then we'll use a pony clamp here and uphold so that it's laying nice and flat. Basically, this is the area that we have to be concerned about, not necessarily back of the stitch line. This stitch line is our patterning point. So I'm going to pull it back a little bit and then clamp it here at this corner to keep the wind from blowing it around.
The stitch line that I'm referring to on the Dodger here at the aft edge is the stitch that holds the zipper that secures the aft pocket.
We're going to be patterning not all the way down to the side, basically up to here, because we want our, this is preference for the extension. Where do you want your extension to stop? Do you want it to stop here and go to the Bimini, or do you want it to stop here and go to the Bimini? We're going to stop it right here, basically at this curved area, and then go straight to the Bimini. Then we have this side over here, the port side. Clamp it on to the handrail.
If your Dodger does not have a handrail, clamp it onto the aft edge that goes slightly vertical.
We have one in the middle, and I think it's in a pretty good spot. Then one over here. So is it all flat right here to this stitch line, which you can see just right there. And it looks pretty good to me. We've got it all flat to the point where we're going to pattern. So here's the curve in our bow, and we're going to stop our extension right about here. We want to do that on the other side as well in basically the same spot. So our extension will come on here and come across to the Bimini. So we're going to put that on the port side as well. So I'm measuring from the handrail. I'll try to duplicate that on the port side. Okay, with our fabric laying down flat at the aft bow here, we're going to basically mark where the stitch line falls with our Sharpie. And dashes are better than a straight line because you can just join dashes together. So keep your pattern material down flat and mark right where the stitches are. We're going to mark sout
for starboard out
and sout on both sides. So the whole idea here is for the extension to have a cover that is installed on the zipper that's sewn to the Dodger. If you did not have a sunbrella cover on the zipper would quickly deteriorate in the sun, because the zippers don't last as long as the sunbrella fabric. So if we know the shape of the Dodger top, we can cut a sunbrella strip to match that shape so that it lays perfectly over top of the zipper. This is pout for port out, and we'll do it on both sides again. Okay, we're back here at the Bimini, and where do we want that extension to stop? Here, here, here. I think when I look at the Dodger and the Bimini, this is a preference. I'd like it to stop right about here so that we can easily get underneath it. This is just to provide shade. So I'm going to mark the tail on the underside at the location where I want the zipper to stop for the extension, which is right about there. So I mark the underside. We'll do that on the port side as well.
Now that we have a pattern from the Dodger and the Bimini is marked, we need to remove the Bimini and the Dodger canvas, or what is called skin, from the frame. We'll be sewing 2 zippers to the Bimini tail to accommodate our extension panel.
We have the forward edge of the Bimini on our tabletop. This is the underside, obviously, because the zippers are facing us. Here are the lines we marked on the tail. So if we measure from this line with a flexible ruler like this, and we measure all the way to the center location, we get about 36 inches. So we'll get that on both sides. We're going to have 2 zippers, not 1 zipper, because it makes it much easier for zipping on the extension. So we need 2 36-inch zippers. Okay, so take a look at this Bimini. This is a tail that extends past the edge of the Bimini. The Bimini frame actually goes in a sleeve or a pocket here. So usually all Biminis have a tail, and that's where we'll be sewing this zipper to. When these are installed, the starter box and starter post will be towards the center here, and then it'll zip out towards the port and starboard sides. The zipper slider will need to be facing up away from the tail, and that needs to be done on both sides. So this one will be installed not like this, because the slider's down, slider puller, but like this. So we'll be applying basting tape to this flange on the back side. So watch me flip it. Slider's up, flip it. This is where basting tape is applied. So I'll put an X there. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Slider's facing up. I'm going to flip it, and basting tape will be applied here. That way we get the basting tape on the right side of the zipper. I'm going to apply basting tape all the way to the end, even though that's probably longer than necessary by an inch or so. And then break it with my fingers and do that to the second one.
A finished zipper is sold in specific lengths. If they're too long, you can cut them shorter.
This is a center location. We already have 2 zippers that are separated here on the pocket. So I'm just going to drop a line down to basically so that they're in the same general area here at the center location. So this is where we'll start the zipper. I'm going to peel off the transfer paper, revealing the glue, and start to baste it, tucking the flange of the zipper well into the fold. So in other words, it's right on that fold. So you can see if you pull this out, you can see that we're not quite in that fold. So I'm going to just pull it with my fingers and then baste it into that area.
For your reference, on the Bimini, we'll use 2 finished lengths of zipper with a gap in the middle of the Bimini's tail. But on the Dodger, we'll use a single finished zipper along its aft edge, not 2 there.
Now you can see there's our mark, so our zipper is a little bit long. That's not a big deal. We're going to actually go long and leave it long and then trim it later. Now here, there's a lot of shape here, so we want to try to work out any wrinkles that we have in there so that it's actually being sewn down following the exact same shape as the tail. So we still have a few little wrinkles here, as you can see, but you'll notice that those wrinkles are also included in that tail, so there's nothing much we can do about that. Then we'll start with the second zipper. Our zipper is pretty much exactly where our spot is. It's a little bit long, but so close that I'm not even going to trim it. Now, if your zipper were longer, depending on the size of your Bimini, you would just mark it with a pencil right where your mark is on both sides of the flange, and then you would sew this on, and the slider would be out of the way of the sewing because it would be obviously all the way to the end. Then you would slide your slider back, cut it off, and put stops on the zipper. For us, since it's about the right size, we're going to leave it this. There's our mark. We're going to just leave that extra inch in there and do nothing. It is extremely rare that you need a roping zipper foot, but here, if I put my foot down I might be able to do it, but I think what I'd want to do is put on a roping zipper foot left or right so that I don't have this presser foot coming down on top of this fairly thick assembly. So I'm going to change out the regular foot for the roping zipper foot left, which is basically removing the toe on the right hand side. So we loosen that screw. Okay, so now we have our roping zipper foot left on, which will mean the center foot comes up against the teeth as we sew. And if we hold this tail out appropriately, that roping zipper foot left will basically be off of the tail, as you can see here. I'm going to position the needle. I think I'll keep it in the center position. It'll be pretty close to the teeth, but it'll be in a good location, I believe. I'm also going to move my slider down until I get sewn up to this spot, and then I'll move the slider back up. So here we go. Hold on to the trailers. Do a little bit of reversing.
The Ultrafeed sewing machine is set up in the Sayrite Ultrafeed industrial sewing table and workhorse servo motor.
Make sure everything's basted down well.
That's why we get such optimal slow speed control.
And I'm going to check to make sure the stitch looks good on the back side. And it does. Now I'm to the point where I can move my slider. So my needle's buried. I'm going to lift my presser foot, and then this is a locking slider, I believe. So it needs to have the puller pulled on to enable it to move. Once it's out of the way, I will pull my pocket out of the way and continue sewing. Now we're coming up to the starter box, and we will do some reversing there, not sewing off the end of the zipper. Then we will jump to the next zipper. And we will do the same thing. Our zipper is installed, and we're going to use the stops that came with it because it's basically about the right size. You could trim this off with a hot knife if you'd like, or just leave it hanging. If you had to cut your zipper short, you could now cut your zipper and install zipper stops if your zipper was too long. And here's what it looks like on the other side. There's our top stitch, and here's our zipper sewn into the tail.
Next up, we're going to make a protective cover for the zipper that is sewn to the Dodger top. Here's a look ahead at the cover that protects the zipper from the sun. Without this cover, the zipper would deteriorate rather quickly compared to this umbrella marine grade fabric.
All right, we're going to cut on that line that we traced on top of our stitch line, joining up the dashes as we cut. Take your time. Remember, patterning is very important. Now you may be asking, what is this line all about at the forward edge of this line that we struck on top of our stitch? This line is actually where the stitch was for the aft bow, and I'm going to be using that in a future project. So you can kind of ignore it for this video. I also marked the center location so that I know exactly where this panel would line up with this after I've cut it. For you, you don't have to worry about this or the center line. Okay, we've grabbed either the top portion or the bottom portion of our Durascreen pattern material. It doesn't really matter which, but we do want to make sure that we have at least 2 inches of fabric at the bottom edge, or if we grab the other one, at the top edge. This is the top portion of it, so I want to make sure there's 2 inches hanging here. If I use the bottom portion, I'd want to make sure there's 2 inches of extra fabric on this side. I'm going to put lace sandbags on this to keep the pattern material down flat, and also our fabric. And then I'm going to trace this right along this edge.
Hopefully you understand this is the pattern that we took on top of the Dodger.
Here's our stop point, so I'll put a little stop there.
Again, all we're doing is making the protective cover that protects the zipper from the sun.
And a stop point here. Okay, while we're here, we're going to label this pout, and over here, sout. However, we're using the bottom half, so the sout should go here, and the pout should go here.
Starboard out, port out.
We placed a metal ruler on the bottom side to prevent damage to our tabletop, and then we use a hot knife to cut along that edge that we just made.
Using the Sayrite Edge hot knife means that our fabric edge will be sealed. This basically helps to prevent the unraveling of this umbrella fabric.
Okay, I'm going to tape this to the table here so that I can easily mark it with my Sayrite canvas patterning ruler. I'm using the chalk pencil here. Make sure my lead's long, or my chalk is long enough, but not too long, because if it is, it could break. And we will strike a line 2 inches down from this top line.
Well, that actually, well, let's use,
When using the Sayrite canvas patterning ruler, you must hold it perpendicular to the cut edge, so you have a line that's struck that matches the cut edge, that is perfectly parallel to it.
So just follow that edge.
When we started marking the line, we did not start at the end, so we're going to go back and complete that line all the way to the end.
2 inches from the edge. There we go. Now we'll just use our hot knife and cut along this new line that's 2 inches down from the other. There's our mark, and we just cut that off so that it's come straight down. And when we're going to be putting binding on this edge and all the way up to here and stopping here. So what we want to do is, because a 90-degree corner is hard, is we want to make a smooth transition to make it easy for us to sew this binding on. So whatever kind of edge you want to make, just make it a smooth transitions on both sides.
This rounded corner is placed on the convex side of this protective flap.
We're going to create a 1/2-inch hem along the edge that's going to be sewn onto our stitches, which would be this top edge. Outside edge will have binding on it all the way to here. If we install our binding on now and then create a hem, we'll have a lot of bulk at the corners. So what we'll do is we'll flip this panel. This is port side out, so that that writing is facing the tabletop, and we will install or create our single hem along this edge. So we will run our double-sided tape very close to that raw edge of fabric that we cut with a hot knife.
The hem would be created along the concave shaped edge.
Sayrite canvas patterning ruler or something heavy like it is very necessary to get the double-sided tape to stick well. We'll peel off the transfer paper. Now I'm going to actually rip the paper here, because I'm not going to do the double hem all the way down until we get the binding installed. I'm just going to create a 1/2-inch hem here, and I'm going to go by eye. I'm not marking anything. This is approximately a 1/2-inch hem. Now this curve may require us to make slits, but we'll deal with that after we're done putting on the binding. So we're going to do that at this end, and then we're going to come down here and we're going to do that over here. We're going to crease this end, both ends, very well with the Sayrite canvas patterning ruler to give it a good crease. Now we have a dog ear here. That can just simply be trimmed off with scissors. The binding will basically finish this edge. So right there, do that on both ends. Okay, we have that single hem here on the reverse side. I like to sew with the side that's going to be visible, so that I'm going to flip that to the underside, as you can see here. And I'm going to start sewing a few inches off of the actual, I'm not going to call it a tail, a cover. And once I get to it, I'm going to do some reversing to lock the stitch in place, just a little bit at the end. And I'm going to make sure that the assembly is pushed well into the fold of the binder, especially at this curve. So take your time there. If you have to, lift the foot and push the assembly in so it's well into the fold.
Anytime you lift the presser foot, you must lower the presser foot before you begin to sew again. Otherwise, you could jam up your sewing machine. We're using the Sailrite 1-inch swing-away binder to install this 1-inch binding.
Oh, I should check stitch tension. I didn't do that. Oh yeah, she looks good. Coming over here where the other hem is. So we'll start slowing down a little bit here. A little bit of double-sided tape trying to stick to the table, so I'm going to be careful of that.
When reaching a curve like this, go slowly and be sure to push the fabric assembly well into the fold of the binding. If necessary, bury the needle and lift the foot and push the assembly in, then lower the foot and continue to sew. Do that anytime you feel that the fabric assembly is not pushed well into the fold. Here we're doing it one more time.
Okay, I'm going to trim the binding with a hot knife so that it's flush with that hemmed edge. That way I'll keep it from unraveling. Now we're going to flip it so the writing is facing down, and we're going to continue to make our single hem. Depending on the curve, you may have to cut a few slits. In fact, I'm going to cut a few in here because it'll just make it relax a little bit more. Just don't go deeper than your hem. That's only really necessary for any area that has curve. See how that relaxes the fabric? Because that hem has to shrink up. Then once the hem's in place, you use the Sailrite canvas patterning ruler to crease it very well. Or a heavy object if you don't have this. Once it's creased, it stays pretty much in shape. Even if it comes up a little bit when you take it to the sewing machine, because it's got a good crease, it'll fold right there.
Next up, we'll sew the cover that we just made and the zipper to the Dodger.
This is the outside surface of our Dodger, port side, starboard side. So I'm working with the aft panel, obviously, where we patterned for the extension. This is the area where we sewed the zipper on. If we turn it over, you can see the zippers on the underside. What we want to do is we want to feel for this edge right here. And it's pretty easy to feel that from the top side. So if I turn this over, and if I place my fingers here, I can feel the teeth right here, and I can feel the flange edge here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark, it basically should be the same distance all the way down. I can feel that. I'm going to mark that edge with dashes. Because what I want is I want my new zipper to be placed basically in that same position. I can actually feel my chalk pencil falling right on that edge. So you could actually just do this. Because it's falling right on that edge as I do that. And we'll do that over here as well, all the way to the point where we want the extension panel to basically stop. We're going to take our cover for our zipper and measure it to determine the length of zipper that we need. We're going to do one zipper, not two, and it needs to be a finished zipper. So we're falling it around 69 inches, so we'll need a 72-inch finished zipper with a double pull slider on it.
If we only need 69 inches, why are we getting a 72? Well, that's because finished zippers only come in certain increments.
Okay, so now let's find the center of this, because we know that we want this basically centered on the top of the Dodger. So we're going to match up the ends and then fold it in the middle here, and then we'll strike a line on both sides at the center position. So that's the center position. We know that the center of the Dodger is between these two zippers. That's not marked, but I'm going to go ahead and mark it there. So we want this to be positioned here. So what we need to do is we need to run this down the length so that we can find out where it's going to start, because I didn't mark it when I was doing the patterning of where we want the zipper to start. Though I don't think it's a wise idea to mark it out there on the boat, but to actually mark the actual flange that you're going to be using, because you know exactly how much is going to be covered. So right here is the end of the flange, and I want the zipper to basically end a little bit before that. So right about here is where I'll have the zipper start. We want to do that on the starboard side as well. About an inch extra. So there's where the zipper will be. Okay, now we're going to take our zipper with the double poles on it, and we're going to separate the two halves. We like to put this part with the sliders aside at this point, and put the one with the starter post on the starboard side. That way we can take the box end that has the extension and we can slide it onto there and zip it this way. So we'll start this right here, and we will be running it down this length, and it'll be too long and we'll cut it short. We never want to cut off a starter post. So because of this, we're going to put the double-sided tape. Obviously the zipper is going to run this way, so we want the double-sided tape on this side. So we're going to flip the zipper over so the teeth are facing away from me or away from the aft edge, and place double-sided tape on this flange all the way down its length. We'll start here. Keep the double-sided tape as far away from the teeth as possible. Now I'm going to peel off the transfer paper, revealing the glue, and I'm going to start basting at that point that we labeled, and we're going to baste the flange so that it's even with this chalk line that we drew earlier. So basically the teeth are right on top of them, the other teeth underneath it. Now we have a curve here, so there will be a slight little wrinkles in here to match that curve. That's expected and normal. I can feel the teeth here. They're basically right on top of each other. We'll baste all the way down the length. And when we baste zippers down, I'm not going to pull hard on the zipper flange. I'm actually being very gentle so that I don't stretch it. Okay, we're coming to another curve here. Might have a few little wrinkles in there depending on the shape of your dodger. And there's our end point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark that end point with something that I can see that's a little bit heavier than a pencil. So right here is where we're going to stop. Now for a cover that protects the zipper from the UV and the elements. We're going to apply double-sided tape on the zipper's flange yet one more time. Now we'll peel off the transfer paper on top of the flange of the zipper all the way down its length, and we will start at the center position to baste our cover for the zipper. So we have a center mark and a center mark on the top that we made, and we just want to basically cover the zipper's flange, and so I'm right on the edge of that flange. This is our fold line of the single hem. We'll baste first to the starboard side, not that it matters, starboard or port. There we go. So the zipper's completely covered, and we'll zip this direction. Same process. Okay, we know we're going to stop sewing here, but we want our zipper to stop a little bit shy of that. Let's go ahead and cut that zipper short at that point. So I'll just go one tooth longer than that point and use scissors at this point. Might as well probably burn the end of that with a hot knife while it's not sewing to make it easy so we don't actually burn our umbrella. There we go. So I'm using the Sayrite canvas patterning ruler here to baste it well. We don't have much holding this together, and we want to make sure that it stays in our position. We can kind of tell where the position is based on the marks, but we really just want to be sure that everything stays down well, and this helps to ensure that. Okay, I'm going to flip this upside down because I can feel this slider on the pocket, and I don't want it anywhere near the areas that I'm going to sew. So I'm going to move it all the way to the end of the pocket. That way I don't ever have to contend with it. It'll be out of the way. Now I've got freedom to sew. The only thing I can feel still is the starter box basically here. I can't do anything about that. So right here there's a part that I'm going to have to be careful about. Everywhere else it's a clean run. Okay, when you're sewing this on, I have it in position. I fed it underneath the arm of the sewing machine. We need to make sure that we do not sew the pocket. So the pocket is well outside of the area where we are going to sew. And I have lined this up with our chalk lines here, and we are going to sew not quite to the inside of the presser foot with the needle in the center position here, because when the presser foot gets over to the zipper, it's going to want to run alongside the zipper, so that'll put my stitch right about where I want it. So how I did that is I basically moved this into position right beside the zipper's teeth, and I can tell that this is right where it's going to put the stitch. So I did that at first, so I know exactly where I'm going to be feeding the edge of the fabric at that foot position, which is a little bit inside the toe of the center foot. Make sure you do some reversing here. My zipper starts right about here, so I'm going to do a little bit of reversing there as well. So now I'm into my zipper, and I'm just going to do 1, 2, and continue to sew. Now you can see the presser foot, this side of the presser foot is up against the zipper's teeth, so that's our guide. When you stop and make adjustments, bury your needle again. It's a good idea to look at your stitch to make sure the stitch tension's good. I can't get to the underside yet. I'm hoping it's good. And make sure everything stays basted well, and continue to sew, and make sure that the pocket is not being sewn through on the underside, which it is not.
For this entire project, we're using the Sayrite Ultrafeed LSZ1 sewing machine set up in the industrial table with the Workhorse servo motor for extreme slow speed control and power.
I'm going to come around and look at the stitch to make sure it looks good on the bottom side. Oh yeah, she looks great. We're coming to the center point here, and there is a starter box right here, so we have to go slowly here. The starter post over here is not a big deal, but the starter box is pretty fat.
The zipper's starter box and the other zipper's starter post is actually on the underside of the Dodger.
There's the starter box. I'm going to kind of help the machine push this in. All right, we're past it. Okay, we're coming to the end here. The zipper stops right about there, so we want to do a little bit of reversing at this locale. And then we want to sew to the end here and do some reversing there. There we go. All right, we're going to use the thread burner. You don't have to use this, but the neat thing about it is if you use a polyester thread is you can create a mushroom head there with any loose threads. Okay, the starter post is over here, so all we need to do is take the slider with the starter box here and do that, and then zip it on. So here we are coming to the other end. We can zip that off, and now we know exactly where to cut this other end. We're going to first cut it with scissors. Once we have it cut, we can use a hot knife on the end of it. Make sure you don't melt the tooth yet because we have to put that slider, back on. So now I'm going to put the slider on so that the fat end is facing away from the zipper. This is the side with the starter box, so the slider has to go on this. Now with that done, now we can finally put on two stops. One way to create a stop, you can use stainless steel zipper stops and place it one tooth from the end on both sides, or you can take some extra teeth, like 2, and cut them off of the extra zipper that you have. And then what we can do is we can actually sink these into the ends of the zipper. This is just one way to make a quick zipper stop. Sometimes I like to take a hard object and kind of press it in there until they're seated appropriately, like that. And then we'll do that over here on this side too. I put something underneath my assembly because I don't want to hurt my Dodger, and I just melt that flange off. And then what you want to do is you want to melt the teeth. They will possibly catch fire, so be ready to blow them out. Just want to melt them so they're sunk together on that side. Then we'll flip it over and do the same thing on this side. That creates a great stop that almost looks like a factory stop. This side's not sewing down, so we can do this pretty easily. Our slider's on this end of the zipper. We can take this zipper off completely now. And again, the slider's on the end with the box. So the box goes all the way down. There we go. We'll save this for the extension.
With this Dodger, we patterned the aft edge while it was on the frame. We can't do that with the Bimini. It must be done on a tabletop.
The Bimini is now laying on the tabletop surface with the outside surface facing up. And this is the tail where we sewed the zipper onto it for the extension panel. So what we want to do is we want to lay this nice and flat, making sure there are no wrinkles anywhere, or if there are any wrinkles, it's basically in areas that have shape. And then we want to lay pattern material on top. Then we'll lay sandbags or heavy weights on the pattern material, making sure that it's nice and flat. So work out the pattern material so it's flat along this front edge more than anywhere else. Okay, once that's done, we're going to take our Sharpie marker and we're going to mark right where the stitch line is. So this is our stitch line here, and we're going to mark with dash marks all along the pattern material, right on that stitch mark. We're also going to mark that this is the stop, and this is starboard, so sout for starboard out. Now we're to the middle position where the zipper stops, so I'm going to mark it where the zipper stops here and where the zipper starts here. The Bimini is longer than our tabletop, but since we have the sandbags in place, I'm going to move the Bimini on the table, hopefully moving the pattern material at the same time so that we don't have to reposition everything. Then we're going to confirm that nothing moved by making sure that our lines are on top of the stitch line, and they are. So we'll continue patterning all the way to the end. Now here we have some curves, so we're going to make sure this is laying nice and flat. There's also a slider here, which kind of interferes with our shape a little bit, but hopefully not enough to cause any problems. Then when we get to the end, right here, another stop point here, and this is pout for port out. And while we're at it, we're going to mark it in the middle position, Bimini. Just so we don't get confused between this pattern and the pattern from the Dodger. Just going to cut a little bit large on the sides and then cut directly on top of my dotted line, all the way down the length.
We're done sewing the zippers on the Bimini and the Dodger and doing our patterning. We can now reinstall the Bimini and the Dodger onto the frame. Next up, taking measurements for the extension.
All right, we have the Bimini and the Dodger, the new Dodger, on, ready for the extension panel measurements. To do this, we need to take a starboard measurement from stitch line to stitch line for the extension, and a port measurement from the stitch line and the stitch line. Then we need to take a diagonal measurement from that stitch line to this stitch line, and then from that stitch line to that stitch line. It's best to use two people, but you can get this done with a pony clamp or a spring clamp. I have secured the tape so that the end of the tape is right on that end of the stitch line there. This is the zipper that's sewn to the tail, and I secured it with a pony clamp. So first off, I'm going to take a diagonal from there to this other stitch line. I'm going to pull it fairly taut, but not super taut. And I get 108 inches. My zipper actually stops right here. I don't know if you can see that. It stops here. So that's where I want to measure to. And I'm going to lay it on top of the Dodger because that's what the fabric will lay on, and I get 108 inches. My zipper is right here because I lifted the protector and I could see where it ends here, and I'm attached over there, and I get 79 and a half or 3/4, 79 and 3/4. Right here is the end of the zipper. That's where I'm measuring to. Okay, I'm just clamping it to this side as well. There we go. And we'll take a diagonal first. Oh heck, I'm already over here. Let's take the port side measurement. I'm gonna come on the outside here, and to that zipper we get 80 and a half inches to the end, to the stop point of the zipper, which is right there. Now let's do the diagonal this way. There we go, 104 inches here. So as you can see, it's not perfectly a perfect rectangle. It's a little bit oddly shaped, and that is totally normal. Don't be surprised that your diagonals are different, that your port and starboard sides are different. You just need all those measurements so that you can make a rectangle that matches. So I drew the Dodger, the Bimini, starboard, port, and all my measurements with arrows with X's indicating where the zippers are. This is the tail, this is the Dodger on top.
In most cases, extension panels can be made with one panel of 60-inch wide fabric. Our width and length measurement required is too large, so we'll be taking two 46-inch wide panels of Sunbrella, sew them together down the middle to accommodate the size that we need.
We have 60-inch Sunbrella fabric, and if I sew two of those strips together, I will have enough to accommodate the extension panel. So what I've done is I've got 5 yards of fabric, and I need that cut in half. So I folded it directly in half and made sure the sides line up. So I have a fold here at the top that I will crease on because the sides are all lined up. And I did get a second helper to help me do this off film. So we basically just have a fold like that. I'm gonna put some sandbags on here to hold everything down. Now I'm not gonna use a hot knife because I don't really know what my finished edges are yet. We have to use our patterns for that, but I'm just gonna cut on this fold.
In retrospect, we could have used the 46-inch wide Sunbrella and joined it together. We just had 60-inch on hand.
Okay, I'm gonna take one of the sandbags off and rotate this so that I can work along one of these edges, because we're gonna do a semi-flat filled seam on the long edges. So just rotate it around. Both the edges are actually still directly on top of each other, which is nice. I'll put the sandbags back on. I can actually fold this back and put double-sided tape on this one.
These are the factory cut edges, and they are finished edges and typically do not unravel.
I like to baste from this side, so I'll start here down because I'm right-handed. We'll put the double-sided tape close to the raw edge, but not over the raw edge. So it's about a 1/16 inch away from the raw edge of the Sunbrella fabric. And again, always use something heavy like the Serite Canvas patterning ruler to adhere the basting tape well to this umbrella. Now, once we have that portion done, we'll just move it down the table to do the other portion. Now we'll peel off the transfer paper, revealing the glue. And we will fold this back over. Hopefully it's still matched up on that edge so that they're exactly even. Looks like it is. If it isn't, make adjustments. Then I'm going to use the Serite Canvas patterning ruler to make sure they stay bonded together well. That's the nice thing about a small table. You can actually do big projects like this with a small table if you use weights like those, and you can work on a half or a quarter or whatever you have at a time, and then move the fabric and work on the remainder. All right, we're going to use a deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide, and we are going to place it on the 1/2 inch markings on the needle plate. And we're going to sew a stitch a 1/2 inch from the raw edge of the fabric. My needle's in the center position. We're going to sew a 6 millimeter long straight stitch, reversing at the beginning and the end. Okay, we have the edge that's sewn here. We're going to splay it open. This is a big piece of canvas. So 1/2 I'm going to let on the table. The other 1/2 I'm going to splay it open, let it droop down on the side here, and pull it so that my seam's almost in the center of this table, like that. So for the top stitch, since this seam is going from bow to stern, it doesn't really matter which side the 1/2 inch tail lays on this. So I'm just going to do it so the 1/2 inch tail lays over here. Then I'm going to splay it open here and crease it well with a Serite Canvas patterning ruler on that first stitch line. This helps a ton when you take it to the sewing machine and sew, because it'll want to fall on that creased mark that you placed, or the crease that you placed with the Serite Canvas patterning ruler. So I would suggest doing this. Some professionals would not do this. They would just take it over and start sewing. But for a DIYer, real good trade secret, or easy secret. I'll just keep doing this down the whole length of the fabric, making sure that I pull my fabric apart and that the tail's on the same side as I do it. There we go. So now, we didn't roll it very straight, but there we go. Now it's straighter. We're going to clamp the fabric together just so it doesn't unroll on us using these clamps. Okay, so now we're going to create our top stitch in this the seam, and we're going to keep that stitch about 1/8 inch away from the splayed out section of the fabric. A little bit of reversing and then just sew down the length. Since we creased it all well, it should be pretty easy just to guide your fabric through the sewing machine. This stitch is visible, so take your time. Sometimes by using one of these portable tables that fold up easily, it'll help you with large projects like this, especially since we have it kind of scrolled, so the scroll doesn't just fall on the ground.
As we discussed at the beginning, this chapter may not even be necessary for you depending on the size of your extension panel. In most situations, they're small enough to be made out of a single 60-inch wide fabric. Next, we'll use our measurements and the 2 patterns and pattern the fabric.
So we've laid our extension panel fabric down. The seam is running from bow to stern. This is the Dodger pattern. This is the edge that we patterned on top of the Dodger, and that is the Bimini pattern. That's the edge that we patterned on the tail of the Bimini. So those patterns were laid at the top and the bottom. Then we took our measurements that we wrote down on paper and we lined up 4 tape measures. Unfortunately, this kind of takes 4 tape measures. You could probably do it less, but it's a lot easier if you have 4. So we have each of the exact ending spots on our line here. So there's the end of our pattern here, and the diagonals are exactly what we measured on the boat. And if you look down here, this pattern actually has the stop point right here. So I believe it's right under here. If I move this pattern, you can see it. We didn't cut the end off of this pattern. So see, there's our stop point, and it's in the right spot for where we want it. Hopefully I didn't mess it up. And we place sandbags on top of our pattern material to hold them in place. We had to do this on the floor. There's just no going around that, or no getting around that. So once it's in position like this and that all the measurements are confirmed, we can actually move the tape measures and mark those 4 corners right where they go on this, and then we can strike lines.
As long as we don't move the pattern material, you can now move the tape measures and mark the stop positions. And it's also a good idea to mark along the edge of the pattern material at all 4 corners.
Don't let anything move as you mark these. Obviously, your tape measures can move because you got to mark the sunbrella fabric, but you do not want these patterns to move.
The Sailrite recommends using the chalk pencil that we're using here, or the soapstone marking pencil when marking sunbrella fabric like this. Nice thing about the chalk pencil or the soapstone pencil is that marks can easily be removed with a wet rag, or just leave the marks in place and let the weather take care of them for you. They'll come off fairly easily.
Okay, now we have all 4 corners marked, and I have the pattern material in place, so I'm going to go ahead and trace on the sunbrella right where the pattern falls.
It is very important to use weighted sandbags or something that's heavy to keep the pattern material from moving. You can easily make these weighted sandbags. We have a video showing how to do that. Check out the Sailrite website.
Now when we get to the center here, I'm going to try to be careful not to knock anything out of the way. This is where our zipper stops, so we need to mark that location. So the zipper stops there, and we tried to keep that in the center of that seam line. Doesn't have to be, but it's nice if it is. So zipper stop, zipper stop.
For the Bimini side, we have 2 zippers with a space in between at the center position. But for the Dodger, we only have 1.
So now we're going to mark south, and we're going to mark in the middle here, Bimini. And we could put Z's here so we don't get confused. That's a zipper stop. And pout. And we need to mark the Dodger on the same side. Pout, south, and Dodger side.
We'll pattern the Dodger pattern in the same way that we patterned the Bimini one. We will not show that.
Okay, we have 2 straight edges butted up to each other. Here's our stop point. So we'll trace to that straight edge. And then we'll come up to this one, and it's on our stop point up here. Then we'll move this one and strike a line next to this one. This line will be a little bit on the outside of the other one, but we'll straighten it out later on. Now that we've struck this line, this is exactly where the zipper will stop. We want some extra fabric, about 1 inch past that. So we'll strike a line now, and this will actually be our cut line, 1 inch outside the line we just struck down. And I'm using the clear acrylic ruler to do that.
In retrospect, a 1/2 inch probably would have been sufficient. We did 1 inch, which is a little bit aggressive.
All right, we have glass that we've placed underneath here. Glass is a phenomenal surface to use the hot knives with. And we do recommend that you use a hot knife on all of the edges, even though the edges will be bound with binding. But if you use a hot knife on the edges, the idea is that if the stitch falls close to the edge, because the edge is sealed, the stitch will typically not pull off of the edge of the fabric. So a hot knife helps to basically secure the binding well.
Coming up next, we will be adding a facing to all of the edges of our extension panel. What the facing does is reinforce the edge for the installation of the zippers and also for stress.
This is the Dodger edge, pout, sout. We're going to trace this edge onto our Shelterite fabric, which is laying underneath the Sunbrella fabric. We have the kind of doll surface facing the tabletop. This will be what we want to be facing out. So the side that's a little bit shiny is going to face the fabric, so you won't see this side. So the shiny side is up, dull side's down. Outside surface of the extension is up.
We're using the Scriball marking pencil for vinyl. It's a black pencil that marks very well on vinyl fabrics.
At the corners, draw a line up at least 2 to 3 inches. When you do that down there too. Okay, now we can move the Sunbrella fabric, fold it back. This is the pout size, so we'll mark, this would be pout still, even though that it's going to be facing the Sunbrella. If it's pout, means it's facing the sun. Out and sout. And then we're going to mark Dodger. There's no reason to use a hot knife on Shelterite. Shelterite is a vinyl that does not unravel, so we'll use scissors. Next, we're going to use the Searite canvas patterning ruler and place it up against the raw edge of the fabric and place our marking utensil in the 2-inch location of the Searite canvas patterning ruler so that we can mark an edge that is 2 inches away from the edge we just cut. Facing is basically a reinforcing strip of fabric that usually goes on the underside of canvas pieces for reinforcements of snaps, zippers, and to also strengthen that edge. That's what the facing is that we're making. We're going to make facing, 2-inch facing on all sides of our extension panel. Now we'll just simply cut this out with scissors. Okay, one thing we did not do, which was mark where the zippers are going to start and stop. And it's basically 1 inch from the edge, but we already have our mark here. So I'm just going to put a mark here and call this Z for zipper. And then we'll do that over here too.
You may have noticed we're marking on the side that will not be visible. It'll be up against the Sunbrella fabric. But without a mark, we won't be able to easily transfer it to the correct side, so still do this.
This is the edge for the Bimini, and the Bimini has 2 zippers on it. And so we're going to mark the Bimini zipper locations, and we'll put the Z on the inside since that's the side that will have the 2-inch facing on. And then we're also going to put the zipper locations here. Z for zipper right there. This is the end of the fabric. We need to come up 3 or 4 inches. And then over here, we'll do the same thing. It's off the table right now. So right now I'm just going to pattern it just like we did the other one. We'll mark it port and starboard, and then we'll also mark it Bimini.
After this facing strip for the Bimini edge is cut out, we're going to use the Searite canvas patterning ruler yet again and mark a line 2 inches from the cut edge. If we used a rectangular facing strip for an edge that is curved, you would have to cut slits into the facing to enable it to lay flat. Because we're patterning it like this, we don't have to do that.
The facing on the sides are completely straight, and this straight edge is 2 inches wide, so it's perfect to make our straight facing pieces. We just need 2 strips, one for the port side and one for the starboard side, that are as long as that side. A little bit longer is fine because we can trim off the excess. I believe our sides at the maximum are around 90 inches, so I'm going to make it 95. So now we just cut it out with scissors, the 2 strips we made. This is the extension panel, and this is the Bimini side with the 2 zipper locations. So now we have the underside facing up, and the outside surface is facing the tabletop of the extension. With the facing that goes on the Bimini side, we have the shiny side with the writing facing up. And onto that side, we need to apply double-sided tape down both long edges. Okay, if we peel this up, you can see that we have a zipper location here, and we need to transfer that mark to this side. And we need to do it here too. Zipper location, zipper location. So we'll transfer that mark there, and one more mark here. There's a zipper location. Now we'll peel off the transfer paper completely and start basting it. And we'll start at the center position where those zippers are. And I'm going to use this and mark those zippers on the other side. And now this goes with the writing facing down, obviously. You can see that the zippers are going to line up. So we'll start basting from the center and go work towards the port and starboard side, matching up the raw edges. Binding will eventually be sewn to the raw edges. Now that our facing has been cut to match the edge, there are no wrinkles, there's no puckers, there's no need for relief slits because you've made the facing to match the edge. Now we'll rotate it around because we're going to put the curved edges or the Bimini and Dodger edges on first, then we'll put the straight edges on. Same procedure here. Okay, now we'll rotate it to one of the straight sides, it doesn't matter which. And we've already applied double-sided tape to the 2-inch strips on the shiny side of our Shelterite. So we'll peel off the transfer paper and baste it to these sides. This is going to be too long. We intended it for that. We'll cut the excess off. So I'm going to go over this pocket by an inch or so and match it up and baste it on. And we will follow this procedure for the other side as well. We will not show that. So here at the edge, we're going to trim this extra away to match the edge. I don't know if there's a little extra there or not, but there, that looks better. This is our straight edge. We know that the zipper starts or stops at the 1 inch from the straight edge, so I'm going to again mark my line there. You can see that line on the opposite side. We do that at all 4 corners. Okay, I'm going to sew a stitch about an 1/8 inch away from this raw edge. I'm going to use the Shelterite as a guide and going to have it line up with the inside of the center foot on this side. So we start sewing by doing a little bit of reversing. And then we'll sew all around the perimeter. Now a good idea is to bury your needle and check your tension to make sure it looks good. This is the underside, this is the top side. That looks great. We are good to sew. Notice how I like to sew with my hands positioned and not moving my hands around much, just guiding, and then I stop when I reach the point where I can no longer sew and I reposition my hands. That way I keep a stitch nice and straight. Now when I get to this corner, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop probably a little bit further in. I'll use my reverse lever if I need to make adjustments to where the needle enters. And then I'll bury my needle, I'll lift my foot, and I'll pivot at that corner. Then I'll lower my foot and I'll sew down the next side. So I'll do that at all the corners. Now you can cut threads with scissors if you like, or you can use Serra's thread burner and actually melt the polyester thread and touch it like you would, well, it creates a mushroom head. That's what I'm trying to say. So we can use this, we can melt the thread a little bit, and then give it a push with our fingers, and it creates a great mushroom head, and which will hardly ever pull out.
Now it's time to sew binding on all the sides of our extension panel.
All right, we're going to sew binding around the entire perimeter. I like to sew a couple inches of binding first to check my tension and everything. And we're going to feed the assembly up into the fold of the binder at the exiting point of the binder. One of the things, I didn't do any reversing, I should have done some reversing, but one of the things that why people struggle so much with the binder is there's a little tilt here, and that tilt is to keep from getting wrinkles in the binding as it's being fed into the binder attachment. So they often think that if the fabric is pushed in at this junction, that it's going to be well into the fold, but that's not true. What you have to concentrate on is the exiting point of the binder, and that the assembly or fabric assembly is pushed well into the fold at that location. So you're concentrating not on the binding, not on anything but keeping the fabric stuffed in at this exiting point. And if you do that, then the fabric will be well into the fold of the binding. Keeping the fabric up a little bit so it slides into that opening definitely helps. Now when I get to the end here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some reversing, because binding doesn't take a 90-degree turn well. So here I'm coming to the end, and I will reverse with one stitch or so going off of the edge, and that binding is on. Now we're going to do the other straight edge just like we did this one. Okay, we need to trim the ends so that they are going to be flush. Could use a hot knife for this, but we are going to have binding cover that. Inside curves can be rather difficult, but I think we can get them done. I'm going to sew an inch or so, prepare my binder, and turn the assembly around for the curvy parts. Okay, so we'll start sewing back, and we'll do some reversing. Foot's down, everything's ready. So we have to keep this area shoved into the binder, and if this curve is gradual enough, it may actually work without having to move the binder out of the way. If it's rather aggressive, because of the fact that this curve runs into this edge of the binding, you may have to pull the binder out and put it on by hand. But it looks like we might be able to accomplish this without doing that, because the curve is so gradual. Yep, we're going to be able to do it fine. Basically almost to the straightaway already. I'm going to push the fabric in at the curve, making sure it's going in at the exiting point. Even if you get a bump here, I don't really care because that is a curve. We just have to push the fabric in at the exiting point. Oops, looks like my binder could be screwed on better. Perfect. We're going to be using the serried edge hot knife to trim the binding off at the ends. This will seal the ends of the sunbrella binding.
All that's left to do now is to sew the zippers on the extension panel.
Okay, I can kind of see my zipper mark here. We can confirm that by looking at the 1-inch location here. Let's see if we can see it over here. Yep, we can see it over here too. So there's my start position for the zipper. So now I need to take the zipper that we sewed onto the Dodger, which we laid over here. Okay, we know that our starter post is on the starboard side. This is starboard out. So we need to make sure that our starter box is on the starboard side. So the zipper will be sewn on like this, which means we need to apply double-sided tape to the back side of the zipper, like that. So we'll apply the basting tape right to the flange of the zipper, making sure that it doesn't go over the edge, but as close to the edge as possible to stay away from the zipper's teeth. So we're going to start our zipper at this point where we marked on the fabric, and we want the teeth to be just slightly back from the binding, no more than just slightly back, because this is our finished edge here, and that finished edge we calculated for being on the stitch line of the opposite side of the zipper. So we want to make sure there's plenty of room for this edge to fall before running into the stitches of the opposite side of the zipper. When I get to my slider, since I basted down that portion, I'm just going to move the slider to a portion that I basted so I can continue basting. Now we basted this zipper on and we're an inch or so off, but the amazing thing about zippers is you can actually stretch them as you baste them. We're right on over here and we're about an inch off over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unbaste it and I'm going to pull slightly with the zipper as I baste it down. So we'll start here. I'm going to move the slider out of the way. And now I'm going to apply a little bit of tension to the zipper as I'm basting. And this will pull the flange slightly. Now I don't want to apply too much, because if I do, then I could have the opposite problem. But if I do have the opposite problem, the nice thing is I can just rebaste it again. So I'm pulling a little bit and basting. Pulling with this hand and then basting. I'm trying to do this evenly along the whole length of the zipper too. So when I get to the end, I don't have to do excessive pulling or shrinking.
If you try to shrink up the zipper by pulling on it too much, you can have excessive wrinkling in the cover material.
So now we hit our mark.
Look down the length of the cover where we stretched that zipper and you can see a few wrinkles, but they're not too aggressive.
I'm going to sew this zipper on with my needle in the right position. Do a little bit of reversing at the beginning. Make sure the zipper's stuck down where we want it. When I get enough sewing in here, I'm going to bury my needle. I'm going to lift my presser foot and I'm going to move the slider past the point where I'm sewing. There we go.
Don't forget to lower your foot after you're done, otherwise you'll have a mess.
Make sure everything's basted down and then continue to sew. This is the side for the Bimini. Underside's facing up. Remember the marks for the zipper where it starts? Here and here. So we're going to transfer those marks onto this side of the cover, which I can already see here, to make sure that we know where the zipper starts there in the middle position. When we went to the boat, I determined which zipper was the starboard side and which one was the port. I marked a P on it. These are the zippers that were zipped onto the tail of the Bimini. So the port side, I believe, is this one. We marked it. Yep, port. So this one starts here. We have the starter box is always starting in the middle, zippers zip out. And this would be the starboard side, and it's a starter post. So starboard side goes here. So starter post, starter box. Okay, so the zippers are going like this, which means double-sided tape goes on the opposite side. So flip them like that. Take this one and flip it like that. Double-sided tape on the flanges. Peel off the transfer paper. We put the basting tape as far away from the zipper's teeth as possible. That way it doesn't get much notice when you're using the zipper. We're going to start here at the stop point where we marked the fabric and baste it about the same distance that we did on the opposite side. There's our stop point. Looks like it's just about perfect. And I want that teeth to be following that curve. There we go. Perfect. Do the same with this one. Starter box goes here. Okay, you can see that we have a little bit of excess hanging over the edge. I'm going to just take this and I'm going to tuck it. You could just hot knife it, but tucking it under actually works well too. So we'll just take this and tuck it under here and we'll sew that in like that. Needles to the right position, just like we did on the Dodger side, I'm sorry. And sew. Make sure you do some reversing. When I get to the starter box, I'll do some reversing here. Then I'll lift my foot and move on to the next zipper. Use the Serrite thread burner if you like, and you can touch the ends of the polyester thread and then touch it like that and it creates a mushroom head.
That's all there is to it. Now it's time to install the extension panel between the Bimini and the Dodger.
All right, we have our extension done. We lift the cover here and match up the slider to the starter post, and we start zipping. The flange covers it like this when the extension's in place. See, if you lift this up, basically the zipper's completely concealed. If we had patterned this so super tight, it would be very difficult to zip it. In fact, it's slightly difficult even now. But as long as you get the starter post in here, like that, you can zip it like this. There's a little bit of looseness in here to allow us to get the zipper zipped. So now that they're zipped, you can zip all the way to the edge and all the way to that edge. There we go. Okay, this is our extension panel, and it's not super tight. We don't expect it to be tight. If you look around your marina, you'll find that all the extension panels from the Bimini to the Dodger are rather loose like this.
Our main sheet traveler is located along the forward edge of the Bimini. so our extension panel can only be used to protect the crew when not under sail. To move the main sheets out of the way for our extension, we simply tuck the sheets on a cleat and tighten them up. Coming up next is the materials list and the tools that we used to build this extension panel. In the majority of scenarios, most of the extension panels are not nearly as large as the one we built. But for a reference, we're going to show the amount of materials that we used to build this extension panel in yellow here. For more free videos like this, be sure to check out the Sailrite website or subscribe to the Sailrite YouTube channel. When subscribing, be sure to click the bell to be notified of new videos when they become available. These are possible videos that may be of interest to you. Be sure to click on them if you'd like to view them. It is your loyal patronage to Sailrite that makes these free videos available. Thanks for your loyal support. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sailrite, thank you for watching.